Have you ever been pushed so far that you had to leave everything behind? Well, Luke Carver was that man. He was stuck in a part of Wyoming where the wind felt like it could peel the skin right off you. If you want to hear how he got his justice, stick around and be sure to subscribe. It was the late 1870s, and a mean winter had a death grip on the land. Even with May showing up, the Medicine Bow Mountains looked cold and unforgiving. Luke Carver gritted his teeth, pulling fence wire tight against a post. He was a quiet fella, built tough, just like the country he was fighting to tame. He twisted the wire till it was taut, then hammered a staple in with a crack that sounded an awful lot like a gunshot. Straightening up, he tried to work a knot out of his shoulder. It was an old ache, a constant reminder of a hurt that wouldn't heal. The bullet that put it there was dug out by a shaky-handed doctor 3 years ago. But the memory of that lead was a burden he carried every single day. He looked out at his land, a hard piece of dirt that didn't give up anything easy. But bless its heart, it was his. A few skinny cattle grazed nearby. They were tough critters, survivors, just like Gwem. They'd made it through the blizzards, standing with their heads down against the wind. His little cabin stood against the big, empty sky, looking lonesome. The roof sagged a bit, but it was shelter and it was home. Most days, the only sound was the wind hissing through the sagebrush. He walked over to his horse, a sturdy gelding, to check the saddle. As he swung up, that old pain in his shoulder flared up something fierce, and his mind went right back to the reason he was out here all alone. It was the sheer injustice of it all that kept him up at night. He remembered his younger brother, not even 20 years old, standing with his hands in the air. The boy had been a little reckless, arguing over pay with a powerful rancher. But he was unarmed when the rancher's foreman just shot him down in the street. The town sheriff, a man whose pockets were lined with that rancher's money, called it a fair fight. Luke knew better. That's why he lived on the edge of nowhere, away from crooked laws. He tried to settle that score, and because of it, he couldn't live amongst folks anymore. He only rode into Bitter Creek when the coffee can was bone dry and the flour was all gone. That little town always got quiet. It was just a few dusty buildings huddled against the wind, full of folks who knew all about surviving. When Luke tied his horse up at the general store, the porch talk just seemed to fade away. Men he'd known for 2 years would give him a careful nod, their hands always in plain sight. The women would turn to the shop windows, pretending to look at things they couldn't afford. They all knew who he was, the man who'd ended a gunfight 2 counties away. The law said it was self-defense, that the other fella drew first, but the reputation stuck. Out here, a man too good with a gun was a man to watch, not welcome. Luke Carver was dangerous. That was the story anyway. And maybe it was true. He had already lost everything he had to lose. Now stick around to see what happens when a man with nothing left is pushed too far. 30 miles east, a stagecoach bounced along a road to a place called Bitter Creek. The road was just 2 deep ruts in the hard ground, a perfect place to snap an axle. Inside, Clara Hale sat on a hard bench, her hands gripping a small, battered trunk on her lap. She wore a dark blue dress, a good one once, but now the cuffs were frayed and dusty. It was a dress from another life, a life with polished floors and easy living. This bone-rattling ride was taking her somewhere new, somewhere unknown. Across from her sat a large man sweating in a suit, and a woman holding a Bible like a shield. Next to Clara, a young clerk kept nervously looking her way. Clara just stared out the window at the wide-open country. She'd never seen so much empty land. It was wild and a little bit scary, but there was an honesty to it, a clean slate that called to her. "I hear the hotel in Bitter Creek is a real dive," said the woman, with the Bible, her voice cut through the noise of the wheels, aimed right at the big man. She was pretending Clara wasn't even there. "No place for decent people," she added. "It serves its purpose, ma'am," the man grunted, his eyes sliding over to Clara. He gave her a look that sized her up, and not in a kind way. "I reckon not everyone out here is looking for decency," he muttered. Clara felt her face get hot but didn't look at them. She was a woman alone, and that was enough to make folks talk. But a woman with her name was something else entirely. She'd heard the whispers. At the last stop, she'd heard that same woman talking to the station master. "That's the Hale girl," the woman had hissed. "They say she was Preston Ward's little secret." "The big rancher?" the station master asked, spitting a stream of tobacco juice. "A bad name. Folks said she ran off with a saddlebag full of his money, or maybe he just threw her out. Either way, she was a fallen woman. Clara's knuckles turned white on her trunk. That single word didn't come close to the hell she had lived. They knew nothing about her father, a man with big dreams and a weak spine, who gambled away their home, and in his final bet, gambled away his own daughter. They didn't know how Preston Ward called in that debt, or how he'd smiled, telling Clara her father's safety depended on her gratitude. Ward was king in this territory. He owned the land, the water, and the law. For 2 years she had lived in his fine house. She was a prisoner in a golden cage, enduring his ways to keep her father alive. But she was wrong. Her daddy had died 6 months ago, frozen solid in a snowbank. Ward had kept the news from her, using it against her, until she found the letter in his desk. That was the night the fear burned away, leaving only cold, hard resolve behind. She had not stolen his money. She took only her mother's locket and enough coin for a ticket. She was running, but she knew Ward wouldn't let his property go so easy. He was the kind of man who collected things, and he hated to lose. The stagecoach gave a hard buck as it hit a deep rut. It threw Clara against the wall. She gasped. "Careful there, miss," the man across from her said. He had a smirk on his face. "You don't want to go and damage the merchandise." Clara looked at him. Her green eyes were sharp and clear. For a second, the man's smile faltered. "I am not merchandise," she said, her voice low and steady. "And you do well to mind your own business." The woman with the Bible let out a gasp, but before another word was said, the whole world just exploded. It started with a crack like a dry branch snapping, but a whole lot louder. A rifle. The coach swerved hard. The horses screamed, a high, terrifying sound of pure panic. "Get down," the clerk yelled. Another shot rang out. The big fellow across from her jerked back hard against the seat. A small red hole appeared in the middle of his forehead. He just slumped forward, dead before he hit the floor. Clara screamed as the coach tilted on its side. The world spun, sky, then ground, then sky again. A wheel hit a boulder and the entire carriage flipped over. Wood shattered with a deafening crunch. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. Clara was thrown up, then down, her body slamming against the frame. She felt a searing pain in her leg, a sharp tear that made her vision flash white. Then everything stopped. The silence that followed was more frightening than the noise. A wheel was still spinning with a soft creak. Someone was moaning, low and steady. The clerk, she figured. The woman with the Bible was silent. Clara lay crumpled on the ceiling of the coach. Her ears were ringing. She tried to move, but her leg was pinned, a piece of the busted seat. She pulled, and a sharp pain took her breath clean away. "Check on that driver," a gruff voice called out from outside. "He is down," took a bullet in the shoulder. "But he is out cold," another man answered. "What is inside?" Clara went still as a stone. The dust settled, and sunlight cut through the cracks in the busted wood. "No witnesses," the first voice said. "But he wants the girl alive. If not," he growled, "bring proof, sir. Proof she is done running." Her heart pounded like a trapped quail. This was Ward's doing. These were not common bandits. They were butchers, sent just for her. She scanned the wreckage. The big fellow was gone, his eyes staring at nothing. The woman was slumped over, out cold. The clerk was whimpering in a corner. Clara felt for her leg. Her dress was ripped, and her hand came back sticky with blood. She was trapped. "Get that door," the voice ordered outside. The handle rattled, then the door flew open. A dirty face peered down at her. "Well now," the man said, his eyes smiling behind a dusty bandana. "Look at this mess." He spotted Clara right away. "Found her," he yelled to his partner. "She is pinned down good." "Is she hurt?" the other man called out. "Looks that way. Her leg is caught. If she cannot walk, we end it now." He reached in, his hand grabbing her arm in a cruel grip. "Come on now, little lady," he grunted. "Mr. Ward is waiting." Clara did not think, she just acted. Her free hand found a sharp piece of wood in the debris. He yanked her up, and fire shot through her leg, but she was ready for him. She swung that piece of wood with all her might. The sharp point dug right into his wrist. He howled and let go. "The little witch stabbed me," Just shoot her and let us be done with it, his partner yelled back. No, Ward pays double if she is alive. Clara collapsed, dizzy with pain. Her leg throbbed something fierce. She closed her eyes, just waiting for the end. Then a rifle cracked. But it was not them. The sound echoed from the canyon walls. What was that? The man hissed, ducking back. Rider coming, the other one shouted. North Ridge. Does not look like a lawman, but he has got a rifle. Another shot cracked the air. Closer this time. A bullet whined off the wheel right by his head. Let us get out of here. This ain't worth it. What about the girl? Leave her. If she is hurt bad, the night will finish her. Ward never has to know. They scrambled away, their horses thundering off into the distance. Clara lay trembling in the wreckage. The world went quiet again, but it was a heavy silence. She was bleeding, trapped, and the sun was sinking fast. Time was running out. Luke Carver was riding the north fence line when gunshots cut through the quiet sky. 2 shots, a pause, then a whole volley. He pulled his horse up sharp. His hand went straight for the rifle in his saddle. It was not his fight. Getting mixed up in trouble out here was just a fast way to get buried. The sound came from the stage road in the South Canyon, a nasty spot full of blind corners. A voice in his head told him to ride on home. He already had enough ghosts. But he knew the stage was due, and all that gunfire was not a good sign. It meant people were dying. He cursed low and pointed his horse toward the canyon. He spurred the horse into a run. He saw the dust cloud before he saw the coach. Cresting the ridge, he saw 2 men getting on their horses near the wreck. These were not simple road agents. They moved like hired guns. Luke fired a warning shot. He aimed high, not wanting to kill strangers. He just wanted them gone. He fired again, closer this time. The men took the hint and rode off hard. Luke kept his rifle ready, scanning the rocks for a third man, just in case. The wind was cold. When nothing moved, he rode down slow, his eyes on the overturned coach. It was a bad wreck. One of the lead horses was down, tangled and dead. The others had broken free and run off. He swung down from his horse, rifle in hand. The driver was slumped by a rock, holding a bloody shoulder and groaning. The man looked up, his eyes wild. They ambushed us. Luke told him to stay put. Near the coach, a dead man lay in a fine suit. A clerk was shivering on the ground. Luke climbed onto the side of the coach and looked inside. A woman was lying there. She was pale, her face streaked with dust. Her dark honey-colored hair was loose, but it was the blood that caught his eye, a dark stain spreading on her dress. It was high on her leg. Luke dropped down inside the coach. She flinched hard when he knelt beside her, her hands coming up to defend herself. Her eyes flew open, green and terrified. Easy now, he said, his voice soft. I am not one of them. Clara just stared at the big, rough-looking man. His face was shadowed by his hat, with a dark stubble and an old scar through his eyebrow. He looked as hard as the land itself. They left, she whispered, her voice like broken glass. They ran, Luke corrected, his eyes on her leg. A piece of iron had torn right through her dress and sunk into her skin. The pin was gone, but the wound was deep. You are hurt something awful. I can walk, she fibbed, trying to push herself up. But a jolt of pain made her cry out and fall right back down. Luke caught her before her head could hit the wooden floor. His hand supported her neck, and his other arm went around her waist. She was trembling all over from the shock. Do not move, he commanded. You thrash around, and you will bleed out. He looked up at the sky through the doorway. Heavy purple clouds were building in the west. A bad storm was coming. He looked back down at her. I have to get you out of this place. To where? She asked, clutching his arm. Please, not back to town. They will find me. Luke's brow furrowed. So this was not a simple robbery. This was a hunt. Town's a 3-hour ride, Luke said. And with this storm coming, you would freeze solid before we even got halfway. He made his choice. It was a fool's choice, one that would surely bring trouble to his own home. But looking at the pure fear in her eyes and the blood staining her dress, he saw no other way. My place is 2 miles north, he said. I am taking you there. He did not wait for her to agree. He just slid his arms under her, one beneath her knees and the other behind her back. She was lighter than he figured, almost frail except for that fire in her eyes. He lifted her and she gasped. hiding her face in his coat to smother a scream as the movement tore at her wound. Clara felt the solid wall of his chest, the sheer strength in him. He smelled of sagebrush, sweat, and tobacco. It was the scent of a man of the outdoors, and for a second, a wave of panic hit her, a memory of other men. But his grip was businesslike, steady. He held her like a rancher rescuing a calf, not like a man trying to claim a woman. He carried her out of the wreckage, his boots sure-footed on the busted wood. Outside, the wind was biting hard. It cut right through her torn dress. Luke carried her straight to his horse. The stagecoach driver was now sitting up, looking dazed. "Can you ride?" Luke asked him. "I reckon so, if I take it slow." "Take the clerk's horse. The boy can ride with you. Just follow my lead." Luke then lifted Clara up toward the saddle. "Put your foot in this stirrup on 3. 1, 2, 3. He gave her a push, and she swung her good leg over the top. She gripped the saddle horn so tight her knuckles turned white. Luke swung up right behind her. There was barely any room. She had to lean forward, and his chest was pressed hard against her back. His arms came around her on both sides to take the reins. "Land back," he told her. "If you try to hold yourself up, you are going to pass out." Clara hesitated for a heartbeat, then slumped back against him. The contact was a shock. She could feel his body heat seeping into her, a warm shield against the freezing wind. His chin grazed the top of her head. Luke felt her stiffen and then slowly relax. He gritted his teeth. It had been years since he had held a woman this close. Her hair smelled of rosewater and trail dust. Her body felt soft against his, and the way she fit against him woke up an old instinct he thought he had long since buried. It was not desire, not yet anyway. It was a fierce, sudden need to shield her from the wind and everything else. He wanted to keep the world from hurting her anymore. He clicked his tongue, and the horse moved forward. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "It is going to be a rough ride." The ride took an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. The ride felt like a lifetime as a mean, stinging snow began to fall. By the time the cabin was in sight, the world had turned to gray twilight. Luke pulled the horse up to the door. The driver and clerk were just dark shapes falling way behind in the snow. Luke slid from the horse. He reached up for Clara, who was barely hanging on. "I have got you," he said. He pulled her into his arms. She was freezing cold, her skin all clammy, the blood on her dress now dark and stiff. He kicked the cabin door open and carried her right inside. It was a small, one-room place, a stove, a table, and a bed. The air was cold, but at least it was dry. Luke carried her straight to the bed and laid her down on the rough wool blanket. He lit the kerosene lamp on the table, and a warm light pushed back the dark. He turned and looked at her. Clara was still, her breathing shallow and quick. The tear in her dress showed the pale skin of her thigh and that ugly, gaping wound. It was still seeping blood onto the bed, and a knot of worry tightened in his gut. He was good with livestock, sure. He could stitch up a horse that met with barbed wire. He even dug a bullet out of his own leg once. But this was a woman, and her skin looked delicate as paper. He went to the stove and got a fire roaring good and hot, then set a kettle of water on to boil. He found a bottle of harsh whiskey he kept around for bad nights and washed his hands. He scrubbed them with lye soap until they were red. They were big, scarred hands. Hands made for hard work and building fences, not for something this delicate. He walked back to the bed, setting the whiskey and a clean rag on a chair. He had to clean that wound. He had to stitch it up. And that meant he had to cut away her dress. He looked at Clara's face. She was awake. Her eyes were open, just a crack. She looked terrified, huddled there like she was expecting to be hit. "I have to clean it," Luke said, his voice sounding too loud. "I have to stop the bleeding." She just gave a weak nod. She did not say a word, just watched his hands as he took a knife from his belt. He paused for a moment. His fingers trembled, just a little. He took a deep breath to steady himself. Here he was, miles from anywhere, alone with this poor woman, about to do something that felt awfully personal. "I'm sorry," he muttered, mostly to himself. He lowered the knife and started to carefully cut the fabric. The air in the cabin was thick with the smell of wood smoke, dust, and the sharp scent of blood. Outside, the storm was raging, the wind howling against the walls like a hurt animal. It rattled the one window in its frame. But inside, the silence was somehow even louder. A heavy silence, broken only by the hiss of the kettle and the woman's shallow, ragged breathing. Luke Carver stood by that bed, his big frame casting a long, flickering shadow in the lamplight. In the dim lamplight, Luke felt too big for the small room. His scarred hands trembled slightly as he opened a bottle of whiskey. Its harsh smell mixed with the scent of blood. Clara Hale lay shivering on his simple bed, pale as a ghost. Her fine blue dress, caked with mud, was ruined. "I have to cut the dress, ma'am," Luke said, his voice low and rough. "The fabric is stuck in the wound. There is no other way." Clara gave a small, jerky nod. She felt a filth that went deeper than the road dust on her skin. It was the invisible stain of the last 2 years, of Preston Ward's hands. And now this quiet, rough man was about to see her completely. He was going to take away her very last defense. "Do what you have to do," she whispered. Luke took his sharp knife, the blade glinting in the light. He moved with care, sliding the tip into the torn skirt. The sound of wool tearing was loud in the silence. He peeled back the heavy, blood-soaked cloth. He tried to keep his eyes only on the injury, like a chore to be done. But when the fabric fell away, his throat suddenly went dry. The wound was ugly, a long, deep gash, but the skin around it was so pale and soft. "I am sorry," again, the words feeling clumsy. Clara pulled at the scraps of her skirt and turned her head to the wall. She waited for the change she always expected from men. She waited for his gentle hands to become cruel and greedy. "This is going to sting," Luke warned softly. "I have to clean it." He poured the whiskey onto a clean piece of cloth. Bracing himself, he gently dabbed at the wound. Clara gasped, her body arching from the sudden, sharp pain. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice steady. "I have to get the dirt out." He was focused, just trying to clean that wound right, and then everything changed in a heartbeat. He was reaching for a spot of blood near the top. It was high on her thigh. The old cabin floor was uneven and his boot slipped. He threw his hand out to catch his balance. His rough palm slid right past the cut. It landed high on the soft skin of her inner thigh. It was a place no stranger should ever touch. His hand rested there for just a second. The whole world just seemed to stop. Clara held her breath, her eyes flying open. She was in shock. It wasn't pain, but a sudden strange jolt. His hand was large and warm. It felt wrong, and yet it didn't. It was nothing like Ward's cold, possessive grip. Luke froze solid. He could feel her pulse drumming right under his fingertips. For that one long second, he wasn't just helping a stranger. He was just a man, and a powerful feeling he had long forgotten came rushing back. It was a deep ache he hadn't known since before sorrow had emptied him out. The silence in the room got so thick you could almost feel it. He snatched his hand back like he had touched a hot stove. He stumbled back, nearly spilling the water. His face turned beet red with shame. His heart was hammering, something fierce inside his chest. He started, his voice all shaky. "My boot. I slipped." "I didn't mean to," he finished, looking down at his own hands. He felt disgusted with himself, like he was some kind of animal. He was terrified she would see him as just another man taking what he wanted. Clara watched him, her breathing heavy. She could still feel where his hand had been. She had expected him to take advantage of his slip-up. But he was stumbling away, stuttering like a Maori caught doing wrong. She didn't see the cruel look she knew from Preston Ward. She saw a man who looked like he wished the ground would swallow him whole. His honest shame confused her more than anything. He was afraid. Not of her, but of frightening her. "It is all right," she whispered, her own voice trembling. But it was not all right. The air between them was changed forever. The air had changed. It was charged now and dangerous. Luke took a shaky breath and forced his eyes back to her leg. He focused only on the wound, refusing to look anywhere else. He had to finish this. He needed to be professional. He built a wall of duty between himself and the fire that had just sparked in his chest. "I have to stitch it," he said, his voice flat. "I'm threading the needle now. I will be quick." He returned to the bed, but his movements were stiff, almost mechanical. He kept his body angled away from her. When he had to touch her skin to close the wound, he used only his fingertips. He touched her as if she were made of glass. "Needle is going in," he said softly. "Hold still, now." He talked through the entire process, his voice a low murmur. One stitch done, tying the knot. Now the next one. You are doing just fine. Remember to breathe. He used his words like a shield. If he kept talking, the silence could not return. He could pretend his hand did not still burn with the memory of her skin. He could ignore how the mix of her sweat and rosewater was making his head spin. Clara lay still, biting her lip. She tasted copper and focused on his voice. It was deep and rough like the land, but held a kindness. She watched his face while he worked. He was frowning with concentration, a bead of sweat on his temple. He was not like Ward. He was not like the men from the stagecoach. He was Luke. That realization scared her more than the gunshots had. There, Luke said, tying off the last stitch. He did not look up, reaching for the clean linen. I am wrapping it now, not too tight. He bandaged the wound with quick, sure hands. When he finished, he pulled the blanket up to her chin. He covered her completely, hiding everything. Try to get some sleep, he said. He turned away quickly, blowing out the lamp before she could read his eyes. The heavy darkness returned. Thank you, Clara whispered. Do not thank me, Luke said from the shadows. His voice was harsh. Get some sleep. He took the extra quilt and walked to the far side of the cabin. He spread it on the floor near the door, as far from her bed as he could get. He lay down, still fully clothed, and stared at the dark ceiling. The wind howled outside. Inside, the only sound was the fire dying down. Luke lay rigid on the hard floor, his shoulder aching, but he barely felt it. All he could feel was the ghost of her touch on his hand. He closed his eyes. He tried to picture his wife's face, to hear her laugh, but the memory was hazy and distant. Instead, his mind kept replaying that 1 second, his boots slipping, his hands sliding, and Clara's sharp gasp. A cold, heavy guilt washed over him. He was supposed to be her protector, and he had felt desire. It felt like a betrayal of his duty and his grief. But underneath the guilt was an undeniable ache. He felt a loneliness so deep it was like a hunger, a craving to reach out. He wanted to feel her warmth again, but he just rolled over, angry at himself in the dark. Hours went by and the storm finally broke. Clara was lost in a feverish sleep. Her dreams were sharp and broken. First, she was in the stagecoach with the walls closing in. Then she was in Ward's dark study. He was there, smiling that slick, oily smile of his. You belong to me, Clara, he said. You have always been my property. He reached for her, his hands as cold as iron, clamping down on her arms. No, please, she whimpered. But Ward just laughed. There is nowhere to run. Clara gasped and jerked awake, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her chest. She was completely lost in the darkness of the cabin, reaching out for anything solid. Clara, a voice said from the floor. A shadow moved and was right beside her. You are safe, Luke said, his voice rough with sleep but firm. You are safe. She could not see his face, but the panic was still clawing at her throat. She found his forearm and gripped it hard. He was here, she gasped out. No one is here, Luke said calmly. He did not pull away. He just let her anchor herself to him, a solid presence in the shifting dark. It was only a dream. Clara held his wrist, feeling the steady beat of his pulse. The awful nightmare receded, leaving her shaking and cold in the pre-dawn light. They stayed that way for a long moment, his quiet presence protecting her. Her eyes adjusted, and she could see him watching her with quiet concern. I am sorry, she whispered, finally loosening her grip. I got scared. Do not be sorry, Luke said gently. He waited for her to let go, then stepped back. Try to get some more sleep. I will be right here, he promised, returning to his rug. But neither one of them slept again as the morning broke, cold and clear. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. The storm had washed the whole world clean. The plains were white with snow. Luke was already up, putting coffee on to boil. His face was set in grim lines. He had a plan, a necessary one. He helped the driver, a man named Miller, out to the wagon. His arm was in a sling. I'm taking you to the Jensen's place, Luke told him. They are 5 miles east. They can get you to a doctor in town, he said. Miller just nodded, climbing aboard. What girl, Miss Hale? Luke tightened his saddle cinch, not even looking at Miller. You did not see her, Luke said, his voice flat. Miller blinked. But I saw you carry her. Luke turned, his eyes hard as flint. The men who hit that coach were looking for her. If word gets out she's here, they will come back, Miller, and they won't just leave. They will burn this whole valley to the ground. Miller swallowed hard, wanting no part of it. I understand. She ran off into the storm, likely died out there. That's the story, Luke confirmed. Stick to it. He didn't wake Clara. He couldn't explain why he was hiding her like some shameful secret. He just rode out, leaving her alone in the deep silence of the cabin. The round trip to the Jensen's ranch took a long 3 hours. When Luke returned, the sun was high. Smoke curled from his chimney. He swung down from his horse, his gut twisting with worry. He pushed the door open. Clara was not in bed. She was standing by the table, holding on for dear life. She'd found one of his old flannel shirts. It swallowed her whole, hanging clear down to her knees. Her face was pale with pain, but her jaw was set, stubborn and determined. What in the world are you doing? Luke demanded. You should not be up. She jumped at his voice. As she turned, her injured leg buckled, and she pitched forward with a cry. Luke moved faster than a man his size had any right to. He crossed the room in 2 strides. He caught her just before she hit the floor. His arm wrapped around her waist, hauling her up against him. Her hands flew to his shoulders to steady herself. For a long moment, they were pressed together. The air left both of them in a rush. Clara's face was tucked right into the crook of his neck. Luke could feel the heat of her through his coat, the softness of her body against his. The sweet smell of her hair filled his senses. Clara gasped and looked up, her face just inches from his. She saw the sudden fire in his eyes, a heat that matched the jolt in her own stomach. His grip on her waist tightened without him even thinking about it, his fingers digging into the flannel. The memory of the night before, of his hands slipping, rushed back between them, heavy and unspoken. Clara breathed, her voice gone. Luke stared at her mouth, wanting to kiss her. The thought was so sudden and powerful it flat out terrified him. He practically shoved her back toward the bed. You need to stay off that leg, he barked, his voice rough with panic as he turned away from her. He ripped his hat off. Are you trying to tear those stitches out? You want to bleed to death? Clara sank onto the mattress, her heart hammering against her ribs as her face burned with shame. I just wanted some water, she whispered. I'm not helpless. He shot back. You will lie there. You're to stay put until I say so, Luke growled, grabbing the water bucket. I won't have you passing on my floor. He needed the cold air after spending half the night patching her up, so he stormed out to the well. The days that followed were a quiet, careful dance in the tiny cabin. They were 2 strangers trying their best to stay out of each other's way. Luke would cook, his big frame taking up all the space by the stove. Clara watched him from the bed. She noticed the gentle way he moved, how his muscles worked under his shirt. She saw how he always put the best pieces of meat on her plate. Changing her bandages every morning and evening was the most difficult part of the day. Clara would lift her skirt, and Luke would wash his hands, his face becoming a stony mask. His touch was quick and professional, only where it needed to be. But the memory of that first night hung between them. How's it looking? Clara asked one day. It's healing, Luke said, not looking up. The redness is down. You have gentle hands, she offered. Luke paused for a heartbeat. These hands work cattle, Miss Hale. There is nothing gentle about them. I know what cruel hands feel like, she whispered. And yours are not cruel. He tied the knot and stood up fast, moving away. I'm going to check the fences, he mumbled, grabbing his hat. Be back by dark. He worked himself to the bone outside, fixing things that were not broken. He chopped enough wood for 2 winters and rode the edge of his land, always watching. He was watching for trouble, for the past to come calling. But he always came back. The evenings were tense, with the wind howling outside, trapping them in the small cabin. Clara would mend his shirts, her needle moving with a skill he did not have. Luke would clean his rifle, the small space smelling of gun oil and stew. Their talk was safe and small. The snow is melting, the grass looks greener. They built a bridge of simple words over a deep canyon of silence. They never mentioned Preston Ward, or the man Luke had to put down. At night, after the lamp was out, the cabin felt full of unspoken thoughts. Clara would lie awake, listening to Luke breathe on the floor, just 6 feet away. She remembered how he caught her when she fell, how solid and safe he felt. She thought about his hands, the ones he claimed were not gentle, and she wondered what it would feel like if he touched her not to heal, but to hold. To hold. Luke lay there wide awake, watching the last embers glow in the stove. He could hear her stirring in the sheets, and the one he was trying to starve was just getting stronger with every little sound. Having her so close, catching glimpses of her in the firelight, was feeding a dangerous fire inside him. He felt like a man standing on the edge of a washout. He knew he ought to take her to town. He truly did. He should put her on the next stagecoach and send her far away. That would keep her safe, and him too. But every morning, seeing her in his bed, looking a little stronger, he'd find a reason to wait. Just one more day, he would tell himself. With every day, the unspoken thing between them grew. 2 weeks had gone by since that big storm, and a spring thaw was finally coming to the plains. The snow was melting back up in the high mountains, leaving the land soggy and dark below. A whole ocean of mud and new grass was spreading out. Clara Hale stood in the doorway of the cabin, carefully testing her weight on that injured leg. The dull ache was still there, a constant reminder, but the wound itself had finally closed up, thank the Lord. The angry red swelling had faded to a deep purple, and Luke's careful stitches were holding everything together just right. She could walk now, but with a limp that made her feel broken all over again in a new way. Luke was out by the corral, hitching the horses to the buckboard wagon. He moved with a purpose, never a wasted motion, just steady strength getting the job done. He had on his old leather coat, worn thin at the elbows, and his hat was pulled down low against the sun. He walked back to the cabin, but stopped short of the porch. He wouldn't look right at her, just stared off at the horizon. "It's time," he said, his voice flat. "You're well enough to travel. I'll take you on into Bitter Creek. You can figure it out from there." Clara held on to the door frame, as if to hold on to this safe place. The little cabin, smelling of wood smoke and coffee, had been a haven. But out there was the world, and somewhere in it was Preston Ward, just waiting. "Yes," she managed to say, the word like a rock in her throat. She gathered her few things, her small trunk and the dress she had mended. Luke handed her an old, worn duster coat. The coat was way too big on her, the heavy fabric swallowing her whole and brushing her ankles. But it smelled like him, tobacco, horse, and the pine from the mountains. Pulling it on felt strange. Luke reached out a hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. For just a second, his rough, calloused palm held hers, and the touch he sent a shock right through her. He let go the instant she was steady, then climbed up on his side and took hold of the reins. "Yeah," he called to the horses. The wagon groaned and lurched forward, leaving the little cabin behind in the mud. The cabin was just a speck behind them. The silence on the ride was heavy. Nothing but endless prairie stretched out under a big, empty sky. Only the wind moved through the grass. For the first hour, they said nothing. Luke's face was like stone as he stared at the horses ahead. Clara watched his strong hands on the reins, remembering how they'd trembled a bit right after he finished cleaning her wound. She looked away toward the mountains. "You've been mighty kind to me, Mr. Carver," she said, her voice small. "I know I have been a burden." Luke just shrugged his heavy shoulders. "I would do the same for a dog caught in a trap." It was a harsh thing to say, but he just did not want thanks. "They say I am a whore," she said suddenly. The ugly word hung in the air. Luke's hands gripped the leather reins tighter. "I do not listen to what folks say," he grumbled. "You should," she shot back, "because that is what you will hear in town." Preston Ward made sure of it. She had to let him know. She could not be a mystery to him anymore. "My father owed Ward $3,000, she said, looking straight ahead. "He cared more for cards and whiskey than he did for me. Ward came and said he would forgive the debt if I went to live at his ranch. He called it protection, said a woman alone could not survive." Luke's jaw muscle jumped. "I went," she continued. "I thought I was saving my pa. But Ward did not want a housekeeper. He wanted something he could own. He wanted me to be grateful for my cage, but I refused him. At first I was too scared, but then I started locking my door. I told him I would work anywhere to pay the debt, anywhere but his bed. That is when he started spreading rumors, telling his men I was wild. He bought my reputation so that no decent person would ever look at me. They rode in silence for a long time, the wagon wheels creaking. My brother was 20 years old, Luke said, his voice quiet. His name was Matt. He was loud and laughed a lot, not like me. He had a claim on some water the Circle T Ranch wanted. They cut his fences 3 times. The 4th time, Matt rode to town to talk. He did not even have his gun drawn. His arms. The foreman shot him. Said my brother threatened him. Luke, Clara whispered. The sheriff, Luke said, his voice empty, called it a fair fight, said Matt was a hothead. They buried him, and the Circle T took our water. He turned to her, his eyes full of shadows. That is why I am here, Clara. For rich men, the law is just a name for their crimes. You and I are just in their way. It was the first time he'd said her name, and it felt like a warm hand on her shoulder. The town of Bitter Creek was just a smudge on the horizon at first. As they got closer, the rough buildings took shape. They were simple wood buildings with false fronts, trying to look bigger than they were. The streets were all mud. Luke drove the wagon right down the main street. The town was buzzing with folks hauling crates and horses tied up everywhere. But when they passed the saloon, all the talking just stopped. Clara could feel every single person watching them. She pulled Luke's big coat tighter around her, trying to disappear inside it. She saw a woman stop sweeping her porch to just stand and stare. Her eyes narrowed at the strange pair. Luke Carver, the wanted man, and the woman riding beside him. Well, look there, a voice floated over. That is the Hale girl. I thought she was gone. Now she is riding with him. I reckon that fits. Luke never looked over. His face was like stone. He stopped the wagon in front of the livery stable. I have got to get supplies, he said. You can wait for me here. Or I can find some work, Clara said, sitting up straighter. She was not going to hide. I need money to get by. Luke gave her a doubtful look. Clara, I will be just fine, she insisted, though it was a lie. She climbed down carefully, her bad leg complaining with every move. She tried to smooth her wild hair and limped towards the boarding house. The sign read, Mrs. Gable's Rooms and Meals. Clara pushed open the door and walked inside. It smelled of old wood and onions. Mrs. Gable, a sturdy woman with a wrinkled face, was behind the counter. She looked up with a friendly smile, but it fell right off her face the second she saw who it was. I do not have any rooms, Mrs. Gable said real sharp. I am not looking for a room, Clara replied, holding her head high. I am looking for work. I am a good cook, and I can clean. I sew better than anyone around here. Mrs. Gable just stared down at her book. I have got no work. Please, Clara said, a little bit of desperation in her voice. I am a hard worker. Mrs. Gable finally looked up, her eyes cold. Miss Hale, my husband does business with the bank. The bank does business with Mr. Ward. If I hire you, this whole town will stop coming here. I just cannot afford to help you. Clara just stood there, feeling like all the air had been knocked out of her. It is not pity I need, she said quietly. It is decency. Well, you are looking in the wrong town for that, Mrs. Gable said, and turned her back. Clara walked out. The street felt colder than it had a minute ago. She tried the little schoolhouse. The teacher, a young fella, just stammered that the school board would never approve of someone like her being near the children. She even tried the laundry down at the end of the street. The owner just gave her a sad look and shook his head, making a clear sign it was too dangerous. Throat, just a whisper of the name Ward. An hour later, Clara was outside the general store feeling beat down. The wind whipped dust in her face and the town's gossip stung worse than any sand. Well now, look what the cat dragged in. Clara froze. A big fella peeled himself off the saloon wall and shuffled her way. He smelled like old beer and sweat. She barely recognized him as one of Ward's old hands. Preston said you lit out, the man slurred, standing way too close. Said you stole from him. You get away from me, Clara said, backing up until she hit a porch post. You don't look like no thief. He let out a wet, ugly laugh, his dirty fingers brushing her sleeve. Look like you need some company. That scarred fella can't be much of a comfort. Don't you touch me, Clara hissed, her voice shaking. Come on, he sneered, grabbing her arm hard. Ward said you liked it rough. She cried out, but her bad leg buckled. Then in a flash, the man was torn away from her. One second he was on her, the next he was flying through the air, landing hard in the street. Luke stood there, looking less like a rancher and more like a storm cloud. The drunk staggered up, spitting dirt and blood. "You crazy son of a..." Luke took one quiet, terrifying step and grabbed the man by his vest. He lifted him clear off the ground. "You touch her again." Luke's voice was a low growl. "And I will plant you in this dirt for good. You understand me?" The man's eyes were wide with fear. He saw the promise in Luke's cold gaze and nodded like a fool. Luke shoved him, and the coward scrambled back toward the saloon. He then turned to Clara. "Are you all right?" he asked, his chest heaving. She could only nod, trembling all over. A crowd had gathered. They were all just watching, their eyes full of judgment. Luke stared them down. He took Clara's arm, pulling her firmly to his side. It was not gentle. It was a claim. "She is with me," Luke announced, his voice cutting clean through the wind. "Anyone that has a problem with that, they can bring it to me." The crowd looked away and started to break up, muttering as they went. Luke Carver had drawn a line in the sand. Clara felt a rush of fear and safety all at once. He had protected her, but he'd also made himself a target. "Luke," she whispered, "you shouldn't have done that." "Get in the wagon, bro," was all he said, his jaw set hard. But as he helped her up, a shadow fell over them both. Sheriff Brady stood on the boardwalk, his thumbs hooked in his gun belt. His gray eyes showed nothing. "That was mighty bold of you, Carver," the sheriff said in a low voice. "He put his hands on her," Luke replied. "I saw," the sheriff said, stepping down real close to the wagon. He lowered his voice. "Word is Preston Ward's looking for his property. Says she took things that ain't hers." "She is not property," Luke said flatly. "Ward reckons she is," the sheriff replied, his eyes fixed on Clara. "And Ward's got a long reach. Barns catch fire, men get shot by mistake out on the trail." "You threatening me, Sheriff?" Luke asked. "Just some friendly advice," the sheriff said. "Take her back or put her on a train west. This town don't want the war you're bringing." The sheriff turned and walked off. Luke stood there a second, then climbed back into the wagon. He snapped the reins. They both knew. The town had turned its back on them. They stopped at the boarding house just for Luke to get a hot meal to go from Mrs. Gable. But Mrs. Gable refused to even look at Clara, just handed the parcel to Luke with trembling hands. Clara waited in the narrow hallway. From the parlor, a woman's voice drifted out. "It's just shameful. Did you see how she looks at him? Like a lost puppy?" "She'll be his ruin," another woman added. "Luke Carver's seen enough trouble. Now he's taken up with a woman like that. The man's a fool. Mark my words, she's poison." That word, poison, hit Clara like a physical blow. She hurried out. She got into the wagon, hiding her face, her hands shaking so much she couldn't fasten her cloak. They rode out of town as the sun sank, casting long, dark shadows across the land. The wind turned biting cold. The long ride back to the cabin was heavy with silence. Luke was lost in thought, the sheriff's warning echoing in his head. The weight of his choice was heavy. He had made an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. He'd risked his land, his life, all for the woman shivering beside him. Clara kept her eyes squeezed shut, trying to block out the hateful voices. She will be the death of him. They got back to the cabin long after dark. Luke took care of the horses. When he came inside, Clara was frantically packing her trunk. "What in the world are you doing?" he asked, shutting the door against the howling wind. "I am leaving," Clara said, her voice thin and brittle. "I cannot stay here." "Leaving to go where? It is pitch black out there," Luke said, pulling off his gloves. "I will walk," she insisted. "I will walk to the next town. I'll catch a train." Luke's voice rose. "On that bad leg of yours? You will not make it 5 miles. Stop this nonsense." "I have to go," she cried, spinning to face him. "Did you not hear them? Did you not hear the sheriff? Ward is coming. He will burn you out. He will kill you, Luke." "Just like they killed your brother." Luke went stiff as a board. "I can handle Ward." "No, you cannot," she pleaded. "I am poison, Luke. Everyone says so. I ruin everything I touch. Now I'm ruining you." "I will not let you die because of me," she cried out. "I make my own choices." Luke stepped toward her, his voice a low growl. "Don't you tell me what I can and cannot do." This was my choice. And it was a mistake, she sobbed. Why are you doing this for me? I am nobody. Because you are here, he roared into the sudden, heavy silence. The fire popped in the stove. Luke was breathing hard, his chest heaving. He took in her tear-streaked face, the fight in her eyes. I am not my brother, he said, his voice gone rough. And you are not nobody. I am dangerous to you, she whispered, reaching for her trunk. He moved in a flash. He grabbed her wrist just to stop her. No, he said firmly. Clara looked up, shocked by the warmth of his hand, and a memory flared between them. Wait, she demanded, her voice shaking as she grabbed his arm with her free hand. Why in the world do you care? They were standing nearly chest to chest. He could see tiny gold flecks in her green eyes and smell roses in her hair. He felt her pulse racing and remembered her looking at him with terror and trust. Every moment he had seen her, every quiet sound, it all came rushing back. Because, Luke murmured, his voice dropping low as his eyes fell to her mouth. The air in that little cabin felt like it was about to catch fire. It was the powerful pull of two lonely people finding their match. Clara's breath hitched, and she leaned in just a bit. His hand slid up her arm. He wanted to pull her in and forget the whole sorry world outside. But then he saw the fear that was still hiding behind the wanting in her eyes. He had sworn to protect her. He would not be like the men from her past. Luke clenched his jaw until it ached, forcing himself to stand perfectly still. He let go of her and put 3 feet of cold, hard air between them. You are staying, he said, his voice sounding raw, because I said so, and because I am not gonna let them win. He turned and stared out the dark window. Clara stood frozen, one hand covering the wrist he had just held. Her heart pounded. Without his touch, she felt a sudden, awful chill. And she knew right then she did not want to leave. She was afraid of a life without him. Luke, she whispered to his back. He did not turn. Go to bed, Clara, he pleaded. Clara saw the stiffness in his broad back, the worry carried in his shoulders. She slowly unbuttoned her heavy coat and let it drop to the floorboards. She walked over and sat on the bed, but sleep was a far-off thing. She just watched him stand guard against the darkness, feeling a deep dread in her soul. She knew this trouble was only just getting started. Their whole world started to shrink, closing in on Luke Carver's land like a tightening noose. It began with a quietness, when the morning bird songs that always welcomed the dawn just were not there. Even the wind felt heavy with trouble. Then came the riders. They never came close, just watched from the high ridges. Dark figures against that big, bright Wyoming sky. About 3 days after they got back from Bitter Creek, a neighbor, Silas Jensen, came riding up. Now Silas was a quiet man. His face was weathered like old leather, and he could not quite meet Luke's eye. He just sat there on his horse, holding his hat. Clara watched the whole thing from the dark of the window. Sheriff was out my way yesterday, Silas said, and spat a stream of tobacco juice in the dust. He was asking about stray cattle, asking who has been coming and going down the road. Luke just leaned against a porch post, his rifle resting easy in the bend of his arm. Is that right? Luke asked. He mentioned you, Luke, Silas went on, shifting his weight in the saddle. Asked if you had had any company. Said there was some talk about a woman tied to a theft over in Cheyenne. Said Preston Ward was offering a reward for news. Luke's jaw clenched up tight. There is no thief here, Silas. I know that, Silas said softly. But that sheriff is not looking for the truth. He is looking for a payday. He mentioned he might just ride by here in a day or so, just to check on things. Silas put his hat back on, pulling the brim down low. Just thought you should know, the wind's changing, Luke. It smells like smoke, I saw him. After Silas rode off, the valley suddenly felt small. That big open horizon that always gave Luke a feeling of freedom, now it just felt like a wall closing in. They were trapped. Inside, Clara was pacing back and forth. Her limp was worse than usual, all stirred up by the stress of it all. But she just could not be still. When Luke came in, she turned on him, her face pale and tight. He knows, she said. Her voice was thin and trembling with fear. Ward knows I am here. He sent that sheriff in to run you off. He sent the sheriff to see if I would flinch, Luke said, sliding the bar across the door. And I did not. You have to let me go, Clara pleaded. It was the same argument they had had for days, but this time her voice was ragged with panic. She started gathering her few belongings, just a comb and a ribbon, the little scraps of dignity she had left. I can take the mare. I will just ride south. If I leave right now, maybe they will come after me and leave you alone. You would not make it 10 miles, Luke said, hanging his hat on a peg. He walked to the stove, moving slow and steady, but inside his gut was churning with a cold fire. Ward's men are watching the passes. They would catch you before you even got across the creek. Then let them catch me, Clara cried out. She slammed her hand flat on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot in that little room. Do you not understand? I am the poison. Those women in town, they were right. I am the reason all this danger is on your doorstep. I am the reason you are going to lose this place. She went right up to him, grabbing his shirt sleeve. Her eyes were brimming with tears, just desperate and begging. Luke, please, just tell them I forced you to help me. Just tell them I lied to you, she begged. Give me to them. It's the only way you'll be safe. Luke looked down and saw years of shame ground into her spirit. She truly thought she was worthless. She believed she was just a piece to be traded for his own skin. Stop it, Luke said roughly. I'm trying to save you, Clara cried. Why won't you let me? Because I'm done running. Oh, Luke shouted. The sound of his own voice shocked them both. He grabbed her shoulders. Don't you talk to me about saving. I watched my brother die because I thought keeping my head down was the safe thing to do. I thought the law would protect us if we just followed the rules. I was a fool. He pulled her close. Matt died. Itch in the dirt because men like Ward reckon they own the whole world. They take what they want. Land, water, even people. If I give you to them, Clara, I'm not saving myself. I'm putting out the last good spark inside me. Clara stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. You are not a debt to be paid, Luke said. His voice dropped to a fierce whisper. You're under my watch now. I'll burn this whole territory to the ground before I let them lay a hand on you again. He let her bump, his chest heaving with rage. Clara stood there, frozen. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his hands on her shoulders. She realized this wasn't just about her. This was about him finding his way back. And to her own surprise, she wanted to be the woman he was fighting for. The attack came 2 nights later. The wind had howled all day, making the grass dry as bone. Luke had been on edge, walking the property with his rifle. He could feel the violence coming. Just after sunset, Clara smelled it while she was sewing. She paused and sniffed the air. Luke, she called, but he was already at the window. I smell it too. He flung the door open. The western sky was not dark, but glowing a nasty, angry orange. Thick smoke rolled down the valley on the wind. Bitba! Luke yelled, get the sacks and the buckets. It was an old dirty trick. Burn a man out of his home. Destroy his grass, his herd, his fences. It would leave him with nothing but ashes. Clara jumped up, her limp forgotten. She grabbed the burlap sacks by the door while Luke soaked his in the water trough. You stay here, Luke ordered, turning to run toward the fire. No, Clara shouted, dunking her own sacks. It's too big for one man. She took off running right after him, and Luke didn't waste breath arguing. There was no time. The fire moved like a living thing, a wall of heat racing for the barn. Flames leaped 10 feet in the air, fed by the wind. It roared like a freight train coming straight for them. They met that fire line with wet burlap and raw courage. Hit the base of it, Luke screamed over the noise. Smother it. Don't let it jump the break. They fought side by side in the terrible orange light. They beat at the flames, the wet sacks hissing every time they hit the burning grass, as smoke tried to choke them. The stinging smoke burned deep in their lungs. Ash and sweat mixed into a gray paste on their faces. Every muscle in Clara's body was screaming, especially her bad leg, but she refused to stop. She kept swinging that wet sack, fighting to protect this place. It was Luke's home, and it was the only safe place she had. Over there, Clara hollered, pointing where embers had jumped their fire break. It's jumping! Luke took off running, burying the new flames in dirt before they could spread. He worked like a man possessed, his face a mask of soot and pure grit. They battled that blaze for an hour, maybe two. Time itself just melted away in the heat. Then, a miracle. The wind shifted, turning the fire back toward the creek where it had nothing to burn. The terrible roar finally softened. Clara let the sack fall from her hands as her knees gave out. All the fight just drained right out of her, leaving her weak and trembling. She stumbled forward. "Clara!" Luke was at her side in a flash. He dropped his shovel and scooped her right up. He carried her away from the smoke, over to the water trough near the corral. He set her down gently, but her legs were like jelly. She sagged against the old wooden trough. She was gasping, coughing up black soot. Luke caught her, holding her steady against the wood. He was panting hard, his face streaked with ash, his eyes wild and stark white in the gloom. "Are you burned?" he demanded, his hands quickly checking her arms, his voice thick with worry. "Clara, answer me." "No," she wheezed, shaking her head. I am all right, just tired." She looked up at him, a fearsome and beautiful sight in the faint glow of the dying fire. The raw fear for her in his eyes just about broke her heart. "I thought I'd lost you," Luke rasped. All the polite distance they'd kept between them had been burned away with the prairie grass. There was no room left for pretending. There was only the simple truth that they were alive together. Luke's eyes dropped to her mouth, smudged with soot and trembling, just a little. A low sound came from his throat, and then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was a hard, clumsy kiss, born from the raw need to feel alive. He tasted of smoke and sweat, his hands gripping her waist like he'd never let go. Clara gasped into the kiss but did not pull away. She wound her hands in his hair, pulling him closer. She kissed him back with a matching desperation, wanting this good kind of fire, the kind of heat that promises life instead of taking it away. Then the kiss softened. His lips became tender, searching hers, tasting the ash and the sweetness underneath. He pulled back just an inch, their foreheads touching. They both stood there, just gasping for air, in the chilly night. "Clara," he breathed, like a prayer. "Don't you stop," she whispered. He swept her up and carried her past the smoldering grass, past the spooked horses, and straight into the safety of the cabin. He kicked the door shut, leaving the world outside. In the dim light from the stove, he laid her on the bed. This time, he did not walk away. He stood over her, hesitating. "I'm covered in soot," he said softly. "I do not care," Clara said, taking his rough, ash-covered hand and pressing it to her cheek. A shiver went through him. He sat on the bed and gently wiped a smudge from her jaw. His touch was slow and careful, so different from that first accidental touch. There was no shame now. "May I?" he asked, his voice thick. "Yes," she breathed. He kissed her, slow and deep, his hands finding the buttons on her heavy coat. His fingers trembled as he worked them free, one by one. Clara helped, pushing the coat from her shoulders. She guided his hands to her waist, wanting him to know this was her choice. For the first time, she was not being taken. She was giving. Luke groaned when he felt the warmth of her skin. He pulled her close, burying his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of smoke, sweat, and Clara herself. They fell onto the bed in a tangle. The world was nothing but his rough hands on her skin. His weight was a comfort. He kissed her throat, feeling the pulse hammering there. His hand slid down her hip, settling on her thigh in that same exact spot. He paused. Clara gasped, arching into him. "Luke," she whispered, "please." The wanting was an ache coiling deep inside him. He wanted her more than anything, to lose himself in her and forget the burned land and the danger coming for him. Clara opened to him, whispering his name as her hands roamed his back. They were on the very edge of it all. One more move and there was no turning back. And then Luke stopped cold, his forehead pressed to hers, his breath ragged. He held himself perfectly still, his whole body trembling with the effort. "Luke?" she whispered, confused. "No," he groaned, pushing himself up on his arms. He looked down at her, his eyes dark with feeling in the low light. "I want this," he said, his voice raw. "Lord, Clara, more than my next breath." "Then take it," she begged. "Take me." Luke shook his head, sweat dripping from his nose to her cheek. "Not like this." Not because we're scared, not because we barely made it through tonight, not because this whole world's burning down. He brushed her hair back from her forehead. Ward treated you like a thing to use, something he could snatch when he wanted. If I take you now, in the dark, out of fear, I ain't any better than him. Clara stared at him, chest rising and falling. I want more for you, Luke whispered. I want to love you in the daylight, when we're safe and sure. I want you to know I'm choosing you, not just the moment. A sob caught in Clara's throat. It wasn't rejection. No, it was the deepest respect. So strong, she didn't know how to hold it. No man had ever paused for her like this. None had cared for her soul over their own hunger. You ain't like them, she whispered, tears falling. I'm trying not to be, Luke said, leaning his forehead back to hers. I'm trying to be the man you deserve. He rolled off her, lying beside her on that narrow bed, pulled the quilt up over both of them, wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Clara cried. She buried her face in his shirt, crying for fear and relief and the sheer wonder of finally being seen. Luke stroked her soot-stained hair till her tears stopped, and she drifted into a deep, tired sleep. Morning light showed the cost of the night outside. Black and green clashed. Fields burned down. The fire had scorched a wide patch of the southern pasture, grass gone, replaced by swirling ash. Luke walked the fence line, boots crunching on blackened ground. Clara limped quietly beside him. They found 3 dead cows in the gully. They weren't burned, they were shot. Luke knelt by a yearling. The bullet hole was clean and right between the eyes. This wasn't accident or fire. It was murder. They killed him before they lit the grass, Luke said flat, no emotion in his voice. He stood and walked to blackened fence posts, kicking something in the ash. Bent down to pick it up. A scorched piece of leather, maybe from a saddle or cinch, burned at the edges, but the brand was clear enough. The bar W, the brand of W. Preston Ward. It wasn't just a sign, it was a promise. Clara stared at the leather in Luke's hand, a cold dread sinking in her stomach, heavier than the breakfast she skipped. He won't stop, Clara whispered. Next, he'll burn the house down, and us with it. Luke turned the leather over slowly, eyes scanning the dead cattle, the burnt earth, his whole livelihood. Something in his face shifted. The calm endurance shattered. Beneath it, the old, hard gunfighter came back, dropped the leather in the dirt. No, Luke said fierce. He ain't stopping while we're hiding, waiting for him to strike. He looked at Clara, eyes steady now, decision clear. Pack your things, he said. Clara froze. You're sending me away? No, Luke said. We're heading to town. Clara grabbed his arm. Luke, you can't. The sheriff works for Ward, but a circuit judge is coming tomorrow, Luke said, his eyes fixed on the town. We're done running, Clara. We are not waiting for them to bring the fight to us. You mean to face him? She asked, her voice trembling. Luke, he owns everything here. I know, Luke said, taking her hand firmly. He expects us to run, to be afraid. He thinks I'm still that broken man who gave up. He gave her hand a squeeze. But I am not that man anymore. Not since finding you. Clara knew this plan was pure madness. To ride into Ward's town and ask for justice was a death sentence. But then she saw their burned home. She remembered how Luke held her and all the long years she had spent cowering in fear. She let Ward run her life because she was scared to fight. A tiny spark of hope flickered inside her. It was not much, but it was brighter than her fear. If we go, she said, her voice now steady, we go together. I will not let you stand there alone. Us, Luke just nodded, then gently kissed her knuckles. Together, he whispered. Then let's ride, Clara said, before I lose my nerve. Luke headed to the corral to saddle their horses. Clara turned back to the cabin. If she was going to face down Preston Ward, she would not do it looking like a victim. She would stand tall beside the man she loved. Their horses' hooves struck the dirt road of Bitter Creek. The sound was like a slow, steady drumbeat down the main street. It was late afternoon. The setting sun cast long, strange shadows ahead of Luke Carver and Clara Hale. They rode together, side by side. Luke sat tall, his eyes scanning everything. He watched the storefronts and alleys like a man who was expecting trouble to find him. Beside him, Clara rode tall, though pain shot through her leg with every jolt. She wore her mended blue dress, its hem stained with ash, and Luke's coat over her shoulders. A heavy, watchful silence hung over the town as they rode past. The blacksmith stopped his hammer to stare. A woman on a balcony just froze in place. Men standing outside the saloon stopped talking all at once. Every head turned to watch the scarred man and the woman they all scorned ride in. Whispers followed them, hissing like dry leaves skittering across the ground. "That's him," a man muttered. "Carver. And the girl. I heard Ward put a price on her." Clara kept her eyes forward, feeling naked under the town's stares. But she could feel Luke's strength right beside her, and it gave her all the courage she needed. She found the courage to keep her head high as they reached the sheriff's office. It was a small brick building with bars on the windows. Luke swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the dust, and tied the reins to the rail. He helped Clara down, his grip firm and steady. "You ready?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered, though her stomach was in knots. They stepped inside. The air in the office was stale, thick with the smell of old paper and tobacco. Sheriff Brady sat with his boots kicked up on his desk, looking completely unsurprised. "Afternoon, Luke," he drawled, not moving his feet. "Miss Hale." "Sheriff," Luke nodded. He stood in the middle of the room, looking ready for anything. "I'm here to file a report." Brady sighed and dropped his feet to the floor with a thud. "A report on what? The weather?" he asked. "Attempted murder and arson," Luke said flatly. "Preston Ward's men ambushed the stagecoach 3 weeks ago. They tried to kill Miss Hale. And last night they burned my grazing land and shot 3 of my cattle." The sheriff raised an eyebrow, his gaze full of doubt. "Those are mighty big claims, Luke. You got proof?" "I have the woman they tried to kill," Luke said, gesturing toward Clara. "And I have a piece of leather stamped with the Bar W brand from my burned fence." Brady chuckled, a cold, empty sound. "A scrap of leather? And road agents are a dime a dozen. It's a foolish game blaming a respected man like Mr. Ward for what bandits do." "It was not bandits," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. "I heard them. They talked about Ward." Brady looked her up and down, taking in her worn-out dress. "Ma'am, your word isn't worth much here. Everybody in this town has heard the stories about why you left the Bar W. Showing up living in some bachelor's cabin? Well, people are gonna talk. They'll say you attract trouble like a stray dog. Maybe you brought that fire on yourself." Luke stepped forward, his shadow falling over the sheriff's desk. "Are you saying she had it coming?" "I'm saying," Brady snapped, "I don't arrest the biggest man in this territory because his mistress had a string of bad luck." The ugly word hung in the air. Clara's face burned with shame and pure anger. She stepped out from behind Luke, her limp pronounced, and walked right up to the desk. She placed her hands flat on the wood and looked the lawman dead in the eye. "I was not his mistress." Brady blinked, taken aback by her fire. "I was his purchase," she said clearly. "My father owed him $3,000. Ward said he'd cancel the debt if I went to his ranch. He bought me. He owns this sheriff the same way he owns his cattle. When I refused his advances and locked my door, he punished me. He started those terrible rumors you like to repeat. He wanted everyone to think badly of me, so no one would help. I did not take his money. I took only what belonged to me, and I will not be treated like property again. Not by him, and not by you." The sheriff just stared. For a second, he looked mighty uncomfortable. He knew what kind of man Preston Ward was. He knew about Ward's cruelty and his power. Before Brady could speak, the office doors swung wide open. "What a touching performance," a smooth voice said. Luke turned to see Preston Ward standing in the doorway. He was handsome, like a wolf is handsome. He was all sleek and dangerous in an expensive suit. He was flanked by 2 hired guns. Their eyes were as cold and dead as stones. "Clara," Ward said, his smile looking as fake as a $3 bill. "I am so glad to see you are safe. I was worried sick." "You were disappointed," Luke said. He stepped right between Ward and Clara. Ward glanced at Luke, dismissing him. "Carver, I hear you are hiding a fugitive." "That is a serious crime." Luke stood firm. "She is not a fugitive. She is a free woman." "She is a thief," Ward corrected, stepping inside. He said, "She stole my mother's pearls and $500 in gold from my safe." "That is a lie," Clara cried out. "I only took my own locket." Ward sighed. "You see, Sheriff, the guilt has made her crazy. She has twisted this poor man around her finger. She told him a sad story to turn him against me." He sneered at Luke. "I understand, Carver. A man gets lonely out on that patch of dirt you call a ranch. A woman like her knows just what to say to a man like you." Luke's hands curled into tight fists. He knew Ward was trying to provoke him into a fight. He wanted an excuse for his hired guns to start shooting. "I know a liar when I hear one," Luke said softly, "and I know a coward when I see one." The smile on Ward's face disappeared completely. "Sheriff, I want this woman arrested for theft, and I want him arrested for helping her. He also threatened my employee 3 days ago." Sheriff Brady looked from one man to the other. He was sweating. On one side was Ward, the man who owned this town. On the other was Luke Carver. Luke looked like he was about to explode. And the woman's story sounded true, which made Brady's stomach churn. "Now hold on," Brady said, raising his hands. "We are not arresting anyone just yet." "Do your job, Brady," Ward snapped. "I will," the sheriff said, standing up. "But we will do this by the book. Everything will be out in the open. You say she stole from you. She says you wronged her. The circuit judge arrives tomorrow. We will hold a proper hearing then. Tonight, the town can hear it all. If there is cause, I will jail them." Ward's eyes narrowed. He did not like it. He wanted Clara locked in a cell, or better, thrown in his wagon. But he saw Luke was not about to back down, and he saw the faces watching from the window. "Fine," Ward said, fixing his coat. "Tonight, at the saloon. I'll surely enjoy watching you defend that kind of woman and a killer." He turned and stalked out, his spurs jingling. By sundown, the Bitter Creek Saloon was packed to the gills. Not a single table was free. Men stood 3 deep at the bar. The air was heavy with the smell of stale beer and hard work. You could smell the sharp scent of kerosene from the lanterns hanging high. Dust danced in the yellow light. The whole room was electric, a mix of curiosity and plain old meanness. This was better than any card game. This was about ruining a person's good name. They had cleared a space right in the middle. A table served as the bench for Sheriff Brady. To one side sat Preston Ward and a man named Silas Finch, a slick lawyer from Cheyenne known for having a mean streak. On the other side sat Luke and Clara. Clara sat perfectly still, her knuckles bone white. She felt every eye in town on her, could hear the women whispering. The men were either sneering or scowling. She felt small and ashamed, just like Ward wanted. Luke sat right beside her, his chair angled just so, shielding her from the crowd. He had on his worn gun belt. His right hand rested on his leg, not far from his pistol. "All right, let's get on with it," the sheriff grumbled. He banged a borrowed gavel on the table. "Mr. Ward here is accusing Miss Hale of being a thief." Silas Finch got to his feet. He was a skinny fellow with glasses that made his eyes look big and watery. He paced the floor, talking right to the crowd. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his voice slick as oil. "We are here tonight because of a sad thing. A good man, Mr. Ward, took in a poor, helpless young woman. He did it from the goodness of his heart." He pointed a bony finger at Clara. "Miss Hale, your father died broke, did he not? And is it not true that Mr. Ward paid what he owed?" "He bought my father's debts," Clara answered. Her voice trembled, but was clear. "To control him." "Control?" Finch scoffed. "He gave you a roof and food to eat. And how did you thank him for it? By carrying on with his men and spreading lies about him. Then you ran off in the night with his family treasures." "I took nothing," Clara insisted. "We have witnesses," Finch sneered. "Men who saw you showing off that jewelry. Men who heard you brag about what you could get from the boss." He leaned right into her face. "Just admit it, Miss Hale. You are that kind of woman, and you just got caught. And now you have a new fella protecting you. What did you promise Carver to get him on your side?" The dirty suggestion hung in the air. "That is enough." Luke's voice cut through the room like a whip as he shot to his feet. His chair screeched across the floorboards. Finch jumped back in a hurry. "Mr. Carver," the sheriff warned, "sit down now." "I will not sit while he twists the truth," Luke said, looking right past the lawyer at the townsfolk. You all, y'all know me, then, Luke said. His voice was plain and rough, but it had more truth in it than all of Finch's smooth talk. You know I killed a man in this town 3 years ago. The room stirred. And I am not proud of it, Luke went on. I let my anger get the best of me, and a man paid the price. I have lived with that every single day. I moved to the Badlands to be left alone. He looked at Clara, and his whole face softened. When I found this woman, she was bleeding out in a wrecked stagecoach. She was not afraid of dying. She was afraid of the men who did this. She begged me not to bring her to town because she knew Ward's power. Luke looked straight at Ward. I cleaned her wounds. I listened to her nightmares. I have seen her courage. She fought a fire to save my home 2 nights ago. That fire was set by Ward's own riders. A thief does not fight for another man's home. A guilty woman does not ask only for safety. He is lovesick, Ward called out, looking bored. It is pathetic. It is the truth, Luke roared. She is the best person I have ever known, and she is worth 10 of you, Ward. The room fell silent. Luke's raw honesty was a stark contrast to the fancy lies they had been hearing. Some of the townsfolk shifted in their seats, looking uneasy. The women who had been whispering about Clara now looked at their own hands. Finch sneered, "But words are not proof. We have Mr. Ward's word against a drifter and a—" The saloon doors slammed open, the sound echoing through the quiet room. Everybody turned to look. Silas Jensen stood in the doorway holding up a man who looked half dead. It was Miller, the stagecoach driver. His face was bruised and his arm was in a sling, but he was on his feet. "I have got a witness," Jensen announced. "This is not proper," Finch protested. "Let the man speak," the sheriff ordered, sitting up a little taller. Miller limped forward with Jensen's help. He stopped right in front of the sheriff's table. He looked at Preston Ward, and for the first time, fear showed in Ward's eyes. "State your name," the sheriff said. "Thomas Miller," the driver wheezed. "I drove the stage from Cheyenne 3 weeks back." "Just tell us what happened," Luke said softly. Miller took a shaky breath. "We were ambushed at the canyon. 2 riders. They shot the man in the suit. They killed the horses." "Bandits," Ward declared loudly. "Just as we said." "They were not bandits," Miller said, his voice getting stronger. "They did not ask for the money box or the mail. They came right to the coach door. I was on the ground, pretending I was gone, but I heard everything. One of them said, 'Check the girl. Ward wants her alive if he can get her. Dead if not, he wants loose ends tied up.'" A gasp swept through the crowd. This was not some rumor. This was a direct account from a man with no reason to lie. "You are a liar," Ward shouted, standing up with a red face. "How much did he pay you to say that?" "He paid me nothing," Miller said. "He saved my life. And that girl," he pointed a shaky finger at Clara, "she did not steal a thing. She screamed and tried to protect the clerk when the shooting began. She is innocent." The whole feeling in the room changed. The townspeople turned and looked at Ward with new eyes, full of suspicion. The whispering started up again, but this time it was all about the rich man in the fancy suit. "He tried to have her killed. He set the fire. Maybe the girl was telling the truth." Ward heard the truth in her voice and felt his control slipping away. His perfect image was turning to dust. He saw only Judge and eyes looking back at him. That big old ego of his finally snapped. "Shut up!" he screamed, shocking the room. Ward stepped forward, his face a mask of pure ugly rage. "You think I care? What you dirt farmers think?" he spat at the crowd. "Y'all are nothing but hypocrites. You love the gossip. And now you want to judge me?" He turned his hateful gaze on Clara. "And you," he seethed, "you ungrateful little thing. I bought you. I own you. You think you can run to this broken cowboy? You are nothing but damaged goods." Clara stood up straight. "I am a person," she said quietly. "You are mine," Ward roared to his hired guns. "Grab her. If this town won't give me what's mine, I'll take it." "No," Luke shouted as they moved. One of them reached for his iron. Luke did not hesitate, shoving Clara hard behind their oak table. "Down!" he yelled. As she hit the floor, the room exploded with a gunshot. The bullet splintered wood right where her head had been. Luke's own draw was a fluid motion. He didn't aim to kill, only to stop the threat. He fired one shot. It hit the gunman in the shoulder. The man cried out, dropping his pistol as chaos erupted. Women screamed and scrambled for the exits, while men dove under tables. The air filled with thick, white gun smoke. The second gunman started shooting wild. Luke grabbed the heavy table and flipped it on its side, making a barricade. He pulled Clara down behind it. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice firm. A bullet slammed into the wood shield, sending splinters flying right by Luke's face. He popped up and fired back, shattering the bar mirror and forcing the second gunman to duck. "Ward!" Luke yelled over the noise. "Call them off!" But Ward was standing alone. He had drawn a small, silver-plated pistol. He wasn't looking for cover. He was looking for Clara. "She is mine!" Ward screamed, aiming for a gap. Luke saw the movement. He threw himself across Clara, shielding her with his body. The crack of the pistol echoed. The bullet hit Luke, the pain sharp and hot like a branding iron. But he did not fall. He didn't let go of Clara, pushing her face into the sawdust floor to keep her safe. In that moment, he remembered the street where his brother died, feeling so helpless. He remembered watching the life drain out of Matt. Not this time, Luke thought. Not her. He rolled off her, ignoring the blood running down his sleeve, and faced Ward through the smoke. "Stop! Everybody hold it!" Sheriff Brady hollered, firing a shot up into the ceiling. But the fight had a mind of its own. Ward's eyes were wild, locked right on Luke. He raised his pistol again. Luke leveled his rifle. He had a clean shot. He could end it all. He could finally settle the score for his land and for Clara. But he saw her huddled on the floor. If he shot Ward down, the law would surely hang him, and Clara would be left all alone. Luke shifted his aim and fired. The bullet smashed into Ward's pistol, knocking it from his hand. Ward stared at his numb fingers in shock. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ringing in everyone's ears. Luke stood up slowly, his rifle still aimed. Blood dripped from his hand to the floorboards. "It is over, Ward," Luke said, his voice shaking. "You are finished." Ward glanced around. His hired guns were either down or had no weapons. The sheriff had a bead drawn on him. The townsfolk stared at him with pure hatred. But Ward wasn't the surrendering type. He looked at Clara, who was peeking out from a flipped table. "It is never over," Ward hissed. He lunged, but not at Luke. He went straight for Clara. He was on her like a rabid animal, grabbing her hair before anyone could even blink. He pulled a knife from his boot, a last dirty trick, and pressed the blade to her throat. "Back off!" Ward screamed, using Clara as a shield. "Back off or I will cut her right here." Luke froze. The sheriff lowered his weapon. Clara felt that cold steel against her skin. She felt Ward's heart hammering against her back. She looked at Luke, just 10 feet away. His face was white with terror. He could not shoot without hitting her. Ward dragged her toward the door. "I am taking what is mine," he panted. Clara looked at the blood dripping from Luke's hand. She saw the despair in his eyes. He had fought for her. He had bled for her. A cold, hard anger rose up inside her. She was not a prize. She was not his property. She was Clara Hale. And she was being afraid. She made her choice in that moment. "Get the horses," Ward yelled. In that split second of distraction, Clara made her move. The saloon doors burst open, splintering the dry wood, spilling the whole mess into the street. Dust swirled up from the frantic horses, their eyes rolling with panic. Preston Ward dragged Clara backward through the dirt, his grip on her hair brutally tight. She stumbled, her boots scraping uselessly against the ground. Her injured leg dragged behind her like a dead weight. The cool night air hit her face, but it brought no comfort. "Back off!" Ward screamed again, his voice cracking with fear. He pressed the cold gun to Clara's head. "I will kill her. Make no mistake." Just then Luke stepped out from the saloon shadow. He held his Winchester rifle steady. His sleeve was soaked in blood, but his hand was firm. He stopped right there. His boots hit the boardwalk as the whole street cleared out. Folks ran for cover. Everyone who was waiting around scattered, hiding where they could. Windows slammed shut. It was just the three of them in the dust. "Let her go, Ward," Luke said. His voice was low and cold, with no mercy in it. "You got nowhere to run." Ward just laughed. It was a crazy, jagged sound. He pulled Clara in tighter against him. He used her like a shield. I don't run. I own this town, the law, and I own her. Clara felt his shout in her bones. She could smell the fear on him, and he was shaking. The man who'd been her nightmare for 2 years was trembling. He dragged her toward his horse. His black stallion danced nervously at the post. You get back, Ward yelled at Luke. Go on back to your dirt patch. She's coming with me. Clara saw Luke about 20 feet off, too far. A shot might hit her. She saw the pain in Luke's eyes, and she knew Ward saw it too. In that moment, something inside Clara just snapped. It was a quiet kind of shift. For years, she had been paralyzed by fear. She believed she was helpless against men like him. But she was not that woman anymore. The woman standing there had already survived the fire. Ward glanced at his horse, reaching for the reins. He took his eyes off her for just a second. That was her chance. She didn't scream or pull away. Instead, she made her move. She stomped her boot heel down with all her might, right on top of Ward's foot. She crushed the bones in his polished shoe. Ward howled, and his grip slipped just enough. In that split second of shock, Clara twisted into him. She did not run. She bit down hard on the wrist that held the gun, locking her jaw like a wolf. You witch, he shrieked. He jerked his hand back by instinct, and the gun fired. The shot went wild. It tore a hole in the store's wooden awning. Ward panicked then, shoving her away. Clara fell hard into the dirt. The fall sent a shock of pain through her legs. The breath was knocked right out of her, but she scrambled backward, clawing at the dust. She just tried to get away. Clara, Luke shouted. Ward spun, clutching his bleeding wrist. His face was a mask of pure rage. He raised the gun, but Clara was on the ground now, clear of the shot. Luke stepped off the boardwalk. He walked right into the middle of the street as the wind blew his long coat. Looking at Ward, it felt like yesterday on this same dusty street where his brother Matt fell. The whole world went quiet, holding its breath just the same. But this time, Luke was in the fight, and he wasn't standing alone. Clara got to her knees, bruised and her dress torn, but her eyes burned with fire. She wasn't hiding from anyone, least of all him. She is mine, Ward snarled, leaning on his bad foot. I bought her debt. You cannot take her. She ain't a horse, Ward, Luke said quietly, chambering around with a heavy click. And you can't buy a person's soul. Ward just hollered back, I can buy anything in this world. Men like me own this world, Carver. And men like you are just dirt beneath our boots. Luke just looked at him, calm as could be. Maybe, Luke said, taking a step. But the dirt is still here long after the storm passes. It's over, Ward. But then Ward saw the pity in Clara's eyes, and something inside him just snapped. No one, he whispered, takes what is mine. Out of pure spite, he didn't aim at Luke. He swung the pistol straight toward Clara. Luke didn't even have to think about it. He just moved. The Winchester barked once, a single shot that cut through all the noise and bad history. The bullet hit Preston Ward square in the chest. He stumbled back, looking mighty surprised. He looked down at the red blooming like a flower across his fine white shirt. His gun fell from his hand into the dust. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Then he collapsed, hitting the ground hard, face up to a sky that didn't care about his money. His expensive suit soaked up the dirt, making him part of the very earth he tried to own. Luke stood over him, his rifle still smoking in his hands. The silence was heavy. He waited for the guilt to hit him like it did with Matt, but it never came. There was just a quiet emptiness. It was finally over. Luke, Clara whispered. He turned to see her limping toward him, ignoring the onlookers. She gently took the rifle from his hands. Then she took his hands in hers. They were both shaking something fierce. Sheriff Brady walked out of the saloon looking older than dirt. He nudged the body with his boot. The boot proved it. His gaze shifted from Luke to Clara, who was standing tall right beside him. Then he looked at all the folks watching from the windows. They had all seen exactly what happened. Him use her as a shield and threaten her life. The Sheriff Brady tipped back his hat. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at the crowd. He could still arrest Luke, but the fear in town was gone. Ward's power had died right along with him. He drew on an unarmed woman, Brady said for all to hear. It was self-defense, clear as day. Luke let out a breath he did not even know he was holding. He gave the sheriff a nod. Get him off the street, Brady told his deputies, his voice heavy. The show was over. Luke did not stick around. He wrapped his arm around Clara, holding her steady. Let us go home. She rested her head on his shoulder. Yes, she whispered. Let us go home. The days later were a quiet time of healing for everyone in Bitter Creek. The poison that Preston Ward had spread through the town was finally starting to fade. Folks began to show their regret in small, quiet ways. When Luke went to the doctor for his arm, the blacksmith nearby reshoed his horse. He refused to take any money. He did not say he was sorry for how he had acted before. He just looked at Luke and said, "This one is on the house." When Clara went to the general store, she saw Mrs. Gable, the boarding house owner. The woman turned beet red and got real busy, refusing to look Clara in the eye. But as Clara left, Mrs. Gable called out to her. "Miss Hale," she said, her voice tight, "I have some extra yeast and dried apples. Please take them before they spoil." Clara looked at the woman and saw the shame. It was an apology, the only way she knew how. "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Clara said softly. "That is mighty kind of you." We never knew," the woman stammered. "You knew enough," Clara answered, not unkindly but honestly. "But I thank you for the apples." And with that, she walked back out into the sun. Back at their place, the land seemed to be mending even faster than the people. Tiny green shoots were already pushing up through the ash of the burned pasture. The earth was turning the fire into new life. Luke worked from sunup to sundown. He dug new holes and set new fence posts, working through the ache in his arm. The steady work was a comfort. Clara worked right beside him, no longer frail. The storm had brought her there, and she still walked with a limp, a reminder of the past. But she was strong now. She rode that mare with a natural ease. She learned to push cattle and mend fences, her hands growing tougher every day. Her hands had grown tough and brown from the sun and the wire, and she wore practical work clothes. But she moved with a grace that seemed to belong to the land. Their love grew quietly between all the hard work. It was not a sudden flame, but a deep root taking hold in solid ground. You could see it when Luke would pause his work just to watch her with a look of pure wonder. Or when Clara brought him water, their fingers brushing, a silent language passing between them. One evening, a month after the shooting, a thunderstorm rolled over the mountains. It was a gentle storm, the kind that brings life-giving rain, not fire. They sat inside the cabin with the lamp turned down low. He was on a stool, she on the floor between his knees. He was brushing her hair. It had become their quiet ritual. It was long, the color of dark honey in the light. Luke held the brush in his large, scarred hand, moving it so carefully through the long strands. He remembered the first time he touched her, his hands shaking, afraid he would only bring more pain. Now his touch was steady and sure. "Does that hurt?" he asked softly, working out a tangle. "No," Clara murmured, leaning back against his legs. "It feels real good." She reached up and took his free hand, weaving her fingers through his. Their hands just fit. "You are thinking about something," Luke said, feeling the tension leave her. "I am thinking about the fence," Clara said. "We need to finish that north line." Luke chuckled, a low rumble from his chest. "You are starting to sound like a rancher." "I am a rancher," she said, turning to look up at him. "I am your partner." "Am I not?" Luke stopped brushing. He looked down and saw the mended parts of her soul, and she bombed him. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You surely are." Later that night, the rain tapped a soft rhythm on the roof as the fire died to embers. For weeks they had laid in bed, just holding hands, sharing careful kisses. They were waiting for the fear to finally leave the room, for the ghosts to find their peace. But tonight there were no ghosts. Luke turned to her, his hand resting gently on her side. "Clara," he whispered. She turned to him, her eyes clear and certain. "I am here," she said, and pulled him close. When they came together, it was not with a frantic desperation, but with a slow and deliberate grace. It was not about taking, but about giving. It was a sacred offering between them. He kissed her deeply, pouring all his unspoken words into that touch, cherishing her completely. And Clara met him in every way, opening her heart and soul to him without reservation. And just like that, the shame Ward had planted in her was gone. She felt powerful, she felt beautiful and truly seen, as the rain tapped on the roof, healing old wounds. It was a quiet promise that they had survived, and they belonged only to each other. They lay tangled in the sheets, with cool air drifting in from the open window. Luke held her close to his chest, his chin resting gently on top of her head. She listened to his steady heartbeat. "This cabin's too small," he rumbled. Clara smiled against his skin. "I think it's cozy." "It's a shack," he chuckled. "We need another room, maybe even two." "Two rooms?" Clara teased back. "What in the world would we need two more rooms for?" Luke paused for a moment. "There are children back in Cheyenne," he said softly. "Orphans who've lost their folks." Clara lifted her head to look at him, his face more open than she had ever seen. "You want children? I want a life," Luke said. "I want to plant cottonwood trees that will take 50 years to grow. I want to build something that lasts longer than I do," he said, searching her eyes. "But only if you want it, if this is enough for you." Clara looked around their rough cabin. The work was hard and the land was lonely, but it was filled with peace. It was filled with love. "It is not enough," she whispered, kissing him. "It is everything." Later that summer, they stood on a ridge overlooking their land as the sun came up. The sky was streaked with purple and gold, and the valley below them was green. Their cattle grazed peacefully by the creek, and near them stood a line of fragile new saplings. It was a promise of shade for a generation they might never get to see. Luke's arm was around Clara. He had more gray in his hair, but the haunted look was finally gone. He was a man who had found his anchor. Clara leaned into him, her limp just a part of her story. She stood tall and strong, wearing a simple silver ring made by the town blacksmith. They looked out at the wild country. They knew it was a place that could be brutal. It would test them with freezes and heat, and the storms would always come back. But as the wind blew through their hair and the sun warmed their faces, they were not afraid. They were like the land itself, weathered and scarred, but truly alive. "Ready?" Luke asked her. Clara smiled, a thing so bright it outshone the sun. "Ready," she answered. They turned and walked toward the home they had built together from the ashes. Two stubborn souls who planted hope in the hard earth and were fixin' to watch it grow. Thank you, friends. Well, now, it's been a real pleasure sharing the story of Luke and Clara with you all. It is a tale of true grit, second chance, and a love tougher than Texas soil. I would sure love to know where you are listening from. Go on and leave a comment down below to tell me. And if you enjoyed this journey, please think about subscribing to From Wild West. We have plenty more stories about outlaws, lawmen, and big open skies. What did you think of the ending for Luke and Clara? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Until next time, you all take care.